Senator Johnson, always good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Sean, hope you're doing well.
Well, I am. Thank you. The same in your way. Bunch of stuff to get to today. All right. Everybody's buzzing about this Signal Gate thing. Just give me your take. Where does this rise on your level of concern?
It's pretty low. I mean, we have so many problems facing this nation. This is not one that I'm going to obsess over, although the media is. Listen, it's not a good look. It was definitely a mistake. I'm sure it's a mistake that has already been corrected and won't occur again. Again, you were early in administration. You know how overwhelming a task it is, particularly when you're now having to try and clean up all of the massive messes left behind by the previous administration. So, again, that'll be up to the president to decide what, if anything, he wants to do with people involved. But again, it's from my standpoint, I'm not worried about it. Didn't have any impact on the strike against the Houthi, which was, I think, the exact right thing to do. The president made the right call. I thought it's quite interesting. I haven't read all of the exchange. I've read reports about it. I thought it provided pretty interesting insight of how thoughtful the decision was, and the opposing sides, which there always are. I have no problem in the fact that people come at issues from different perspectives, and I think it shows a pretty strong presidential decision-making leadership.
Right. All right. I don't want to dwell. I just want to ask you one more question, then we're going to move on. I guess the issue that most folks in the media and on the left are having is, was Signal the appropriate place to have a discussion of this nature?
Yeah, I think we need to review the Federal Records Act. It sounds like, again, I haven't verified this, but Signal was actually loaded on their government-issued devices. So what else are you supposed to do? I mean, we live in a modern world now, and you can't always run down to a skiff to discuss everything. So again, the lamestream, the corporate, the legacy media, they're going to blow this way out of proportion, which is exactly what they're doing.
All right. Let's move on to spending. You have been very clear about concerns over the deficit. You come from the business world. Give me a sense of where you think things are right now, just big picture, macro-wise, in terms of the reconciliation effort, cutting spending, et cetera.
So let me lay out just the macro case for my position. In 2019, we spent $4.4 trillion total. This year, we will spend $7.3 trillion. That's a 63% increase as our population has grown about 2.6%. What I've done, I did this in a Wall Street Journal article on January 2nd, is I laid out pre-pandemic spending levels. You go back to Clinton of 1998, when we actually had a surplus. That, by the way, passed the Senate 77-22. Democrats and Republicans serving today voted for that. Go back to Obama, 2014, or Trump's 2019. Take today's Social Security and Medicare. You can even take today's Medicaid. Exempt them. Spend what we need to spend. And plus up those other total outlays by population growth and inflation. With Clinton, we'd be spending $5.5 trillion. With Obama's 2014, we'd be spending $6.3. With Trump's 2019, we'd be spending $6.5. There's no justification whatsoever for us to be spending a penny more than $6.5 trillion, and yet we're going to be spending $7.3. And the House budget resolution, that $1.5 trillion in cuts, that's $150 billion off of $7.3. That lands us still spending $7.1 trillion. Sean, I don't think anybody that voted for Trump anticipated we would continue to spend at President Biden's levels. Now, the good news is I was in the White House with President the Thursday before we left on recess. I had an opportunity to talk to him about these pre-pandemic levels. A number of times he said, I love this concept. Everybody on board with this thing? How about the House? The House will love this. So I think the president is certainly sympathetic with my position here. But right now you got Speaker Johnson saying pretty well take the House resolution or take it or leave it. We're going to leave it. That House resolution has no chance in the Senate. So Leader Thune understands that. He's trying to work on something in terms of the big, beautiful bill. I've been saying for quite some time, let's keep this simple. Let's get the border funding done. I've actually proposed a 3-step process. Border funding, you got to throw in defense on that, fine. Then just extend the current tax code. I hate the current tax code, but we have to take an automatic massive tax increase off the table. Then we start working on the big, beautiful bill, which is also one really big, complex, difficult to pass, high risk, quite honestly, bill to put all your hopes and dreams in. So let's get the border funding. Let's take a massive tax increase off the table. Then let's get down to brass tacks and do the really hard work of returning to a pre-pandemic level of spending and providing, the tax proposals that President Trump had for working class Americans, business tax relief that has already expired, which, by the way, that was a real problem with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. It expires automatically. We can't do that this time either, which is another difference between the House and the Senate versions.
So how many people are on your team on this approach?
A lot.
Really?
Again, I can tell you right now, especially a three-step process. I mean, John Thune suggested 2 steps. I added the third. Again, I understand the difficult nature in the House. It'll take presidential leadership, but it's the smart thing to do. It's the low-risk thing to do. We would already have the border funding done. We could probably have already prevented a massive tax increase, and we could be working on what the House is still going to be working on that doesn't have a chance in the Senate. So,
one of the things that I've been arguing for, though, is that like I wrote a piece in the Newsweek, I wrote a piece in Washington Times, that like if we don't use the congressional majorities that we have now to lock in not just border, but a lot of immigration, like stuff that we as Republicans have talked about, we're going to regret this in a couple of years.
Again, that could already be done. That could already be done. I'm sorry, Mr. President, you were sold a bill of goods by the House, like they're going to come up with some big, beautiful bill. Sean, you remember Obamacare?
Yeah.
It's sunk like a stone. Okay. And that's really what the House budget resolution, again, I have sympathy with those guys. I like those guys. They blew it. Okay.
So what's the next step then? I mean, like right now, I get you've got a lot of people on board, but you're right. They've sold the president on this approach. What is it? Is it trying to turn the ship backwards and saying this isn't going to work? We got to stop now. I mean, it seems like the president's on board on this.
Well, if my advice to the president is, admit you made a mistake, go to multiple step process, have the House take up the Senate budget resolution, get it passed, do it now. Okay, it's not that hard. Extend the current tax law, take an automatic tax increase off the table, then get to work on the big, beautiful bill. Now, if he doesn't accept that, I know Leader Thune is trying to work with the House resolution and recognize the reality in the Senate that that's not going to pass. I mean, there are enough of us that will make sure that we're not going to vote for that. And there's no amount of pressure, quite honestly, that President Trump can put on us to pass the House resolution. It's simply inadequate.
But it seems to me they sell this, Senator, as they're the more conservative ones than you guys.
That's a total crock. Again, Sean, $7.3 trillion down to 7.1. Are you kidding me? Again, nobody can refute or has even attempted to refute my logic on a pre-pandemic level of spending. We've got the 5.5 to 6.5. Lindsey Graham agreed and chose for the Senate budget a fourth option, which is use just President Trump's last budget. That puts us at $6.61 trillion. Again, not touching Social Security, not touching Medicare. You don't even have to touch Medicaid. Here's one of the things that the House blew, even in their meager spending reductions of $150 billion a year, $1.5 trillion over 10 years. They gave instructions to the ENC committee. $880 billion is coming out of that committee. All they can do is cut Medicare and Medicaid. And I'm saying you don't have to do that. You can exempt all those and still save $700 billion off of what we're spending today just by going back to 2019 spending levels, inflated for population growth and inflation.
So that sounds very reasonable to me. I get that, which is, hey, why don't we actually use something that's based in numbers? Why? Who is resisting that and why? Like somebody's got to say, here's why it doesn't make sense, because that sounds like the people who oppose that sound very swampy to me.
That's the problem. We're dealing with the swamp. They've never been in business. They don't realize how easy this would be in business. Let's take 3 zeros off this thing, or 6 zeros, and you're talking about $1 million or $1 billion company. if my managers back in 2019, if I told them, okay, you can increase your budget, but only based on inflation. We're not growing. If you have more customers, you can do it based on number of customers, whatever. But I mean, those are your constraints. And then 6 years later, I come to find out about 5 or 6 divisions have increased their budgets way beyond the cost of inflation or the number of customers they've added. In a 5-minute meeting, I'd say, you can't do that. Cut your budget back to what it should be, which is 2019 plus inflation and the number of people you're serving. It'd be simple. It would be over in 5 minutes. Every business does does it exactly that way. Not the federal government. The federal government, first of all, we don't even know total spending. 3 years ago during an omnibus spending fight, I asked my Republican colleagues, hey, anybody know how much we spent last year in total? Nobody answered. I went out to the press corps, asked the same question. The auditors, right? The whiz kids out here. Somebody said, well, it's like over $1 trillion. No, that's just discretionary spending. I'm talking about total spending. The answer was $6.5 trillion. We're the largest financial entity in the world, and nobody knows how much in total we spent. They do now because I raised the issue 3 years ago, but there's no process for us to review that. We only appropriate less than 25% now of the federal budget. The rest is on automatic pilot. But under reconciliation, all we can touch is the other mandatory. But again, when people think mandatory, they think Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. There's $1.3 trillion of spending other than those 3 items. And that went from $642 billion in 2019 to $1.3 trillion now. But there's
So what makes that money up? What is that though?
It's all over the board. It's what it is, Sean, and this is what the Uniparty has done. They've taken what was discretionary spending and they turned it into mandatory. So they open up holes in discretionary so they can sit back and pat themselves on the back and, we held the line on discretionary spending. We only increased 2% this year. And by the way, that's the mindless approach. So you take 75% of the budget, you put it on an automatic pilot. Nobody ever looks at it other than say you can't touch it. And then on discretionary spending, you don't do zero-based budgeting. You just take what we spent last year and then pat yourself on the back when you only increase it by 3%. Again, it's a completely mindless approach. But again, probably every Republican member of Congress, when they were campaigning, said we ought to return to zero-based budgeting.
Well, just so the audience understands that, right? And I just want people to get this because you get this as a businessman. Like when you do zero-based budgeting, you stop, you say, let's start this year, clean slate. You have no money. Justify your budget, which I've done in the private sector. I actually did. Even at the RNC, we would start every year. Here's the salaries we need. Here's the number of bodies. Here's how many copiers we need. And we built a budget from zero every time. The government says, you got $100 last year. We'll give you 108 this year. You never have to justify your past. And that's the problem is that you're building off. It's like building a crappy house off a broken foundation. If it's not there to begin with, you're just going to keep throwing good money after bad.
So, Sean, as you know, every Republican member probably ran on zero-based budgeting, right? I'm not even proposing that. I'm saying, how about a $5.5 to $6.5 trillion base budget? We'll start there. And again, I have this in the Wall Street Journal article on January 2nd. Everybody's known about it. I sent it to everybody. Nobody argues with it, and yet it's being basically ignored. The minute I start talking about this, everybody's throwing in the towel going, well, we can't do that.
But what's the excuse? Like, why did that when they, what I've never understood is everything you just said, right? I think most people look at it and say, that makes sense. So when you say this and you outline it in the Wall Street Journal and say, here's what we're spending and why, what is the rationale of another senator or another House member that says, Senator Johnson just can't do it? Like, I keep thinking like, what is it? It doesn't taste good. It's too heavy. What is the excuse?
They offer none because they can't dispute it. It's just can't. I kind of like my kids. I say, 3/4 of the word can't is can. But the good news is gaining traction. My last op-ed, my last column that ran the Wall Street Journal laid out a process to actually accomplishing this. And what I suggested is a group of senators with a group of House members and a group from the administration, probably Russ Vought and his OMB. We set up a panel. We go through the budget line by line. There's about 2,400 individual expenditure items. We go line by line with the department heads and their chief financial officers sitting in front of us, just like you do in a business, a budget review meeting, and they're going to have to justify. Why are you spending more than 2019 plussed up for population growth and inflation? Justify that. They won't be able to. By the way, they won't be able to justify a bunch of things based on Joe's. So this is where this is so complementary. So Elon Musk is uncovering all these grotesque levels of waste, fraud, and abuse. What we ought to be doing is a monthly rescission package, headlined by the top 3 or top 5 or top 10 grotesque examples they've uncovered for the month. Add some other stuff to it, and we should start rescinding spending. We can do that in the discretionary accounts. And then the other things have to be handled through, again, a budget review process on the mandatory side. But again, I hear so many people say, well, we're not serious about reducing spending if we don't address the entitlements. And I'm proving that wrong. No, you can leave Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid alone, and you still have $700 billion of savings, just eliminating the inflation, the spending that's above 2019 fully inflated for population growth and inflation. Again, this isn't hard at all. This is low-hanging fruit. And again, what the House did in their meager budget, $1.5 trillion, more than half of that goes to ENC, which can only cut Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, it's just a self-inflicted wound. It's just, I'm sorry, it was stupid to do that. So again, now that the speakers laid down the gauntlet, basically say, take up the House budget resolution or not, we're saying, sorry, digging our heels in, and I hope President Trump understands that. I hope the speaker understands that. I think John Thune definitely understands it, particularly after our discussion last night. That's going nowhere. So time to regroup, either totally retool what the House has done, bring us down to pre-pandemic level, set up this panel so that we can expose this to the public. Again, we need a different process.
Right.
Simpson-Bowles didn't work. It was a commission. It was ignored. We have to have an integrated process for looking at total government spending, and I would say it has to be done every year. Now, I've always said this. Everything should be on budget. And the first thing people say, he wants to cut Social Security, put it on the chopping block. No, we have to look at total spending because we're not doing it right now.
You're quoted as saying, I'm not going to support any budget resolution that doesn't return us to some reasonable pre-pandemic spending base. So right. If this goes forward, are you a no?
Oh, yeah. And Leader Thune knows that. We told him, very point blank, and we've got more than enough of us to say, you put the House budget resolution on the floor of the Senate, you won't even get motion to proceed on it. It's dead.
Wow. On the tax cut front, because I think you've been very clear on the spending. On the tax cut front, you mentioned we've got these 2017 tax cuts that President Trump passed in his first term. And then he's got a bunch of other stuff. No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, potentially a write-off for American-made cars. You've got Senator Pete Ricketts, your colleague out there, talking about potentially eliminating taxes on military benefits, retirement benefits. Where do you come down on what tax package? What's that elixir that needs the recipe of tax cuts that needs to be part of this package?
Well, again, the first thing you do is you take an automatic tax increase off the table. So you just use current policy, one sentence bill, literally extend current tax law, boom, that massive tax increase is off the table. Then I would love to simplify and rationalize our tax code. And by the way, throwing all this other new stuff, special credits, all kinds of stuff, does not simplify it. It might rationalize it. It might be good from a standpoint of supporting the working man of America. So I support the direction President Trump's going, but I would love to simplify and rationalize the tax code. Obviously we've got parts of the TCJA that have already expired, which we ought to learn from that, right? I mean, that was a blunder. That wasn't very smart, structuring that so that it automatically expires. That's just not smart. So let's not make the same mistake. We can do that by using current policy.
So that means just for the audience to understand that when you say that, if you use current policy, then that won't, quote, add to the deficit. Is that right?
Right. So currently on spending, let's say you've got a spending program that ends and Congress says we're going to extend it. There's no score because it's scored based on current policy. Taxes, however, based on current law. So if a tax cut expires, now to extend it is a massive score. By the way, just to show you what BS that score is, when we passed the entire tax package, it was a $1.5 trillion score. If you inflate that based on the CPI, it'd be $2 trillion. Somehow CBO's come up with a $4.7 trillion score of extending part of the TCJA because again, the system here, it's just all cooked to make sure that we spend as much money as possible and tax as much as possible. Okay, it's completely irrational, yet we're locked into these rules. Again, Crapo and his staff came up with the idea. It's like, well, let's equate the current policy versus current law. And, pointing that out to everybody, you go, well, duh, we should do that. But the House didn't do it. And I know why they didn't, because we got people in the House that want to reduce spending a whole lot more. That's their cudgel to actually reduce spending, but it didn't work.
All right, I got a couple more things I want to hit on. Yesterday, look, President Trump's made it very clear that he doesn't like how some of these district federal judges are ruling against, frankly, what should seem pretty common sense in terms of what he's trying to do. And whether it's oversight over federal agencies as the chief executive, I mean, that's one thing. The rulings on the deportations. Speaker Johnson said yesterday that Congress has the ability to completely eliminate a district and its judge, and then also said desperate times call for desperate measures with respect to at least alluding to the impeachment of judges. So I get it. Right now, a district judge makes a ruling in Wisconsin, and that ruling is taken nationwide. So they can, quote, eliminate a district. They can also legislate that a district only covers what it does. And they can also impeach judges. Are you in favor of actually starting the process of impeaching judges?
Well, first of all, the courts have exceeded their constitutional constraints. Congress has willingly given up its constitutional authority to the executive branch in many cases. So we're out of balance right now. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think it's outrageous that you have district judges issuing nationwide injunctions. The Supreme Court ought to rein that in. There's a really good article in today's Wall Street Journal talking about exactly how to do that. I think, our founders believed that each individual branch would jealously guard their constitutional power so that you couldn't let one exceed its constraints by much before the other two would rein them in. So President Trump is trying to rein in the courts. Congress could certainly try reining the courts. It won't work because all this stuff would require Democrats to cooperate, and they won't. So we can talk about it, but it won't work. I'd be happy to participate in it, but it won't work. So what we really need at this point in time is Justice Roberts. He's not happy with the fact that President Trump is calling for impeachment. Well, Justice Roberts, you got to fix this. Right. I think Justice Thomas has already talked about the abuse of these nationwide injunctions, but the Supreme Court hasn't taken it up. So again, if you want to guard your independence, rein this in. Your district courts are exceeding their constitutional authority. Justice Roberts, Supreme Court, rein them in and stop this abuse.
All right. Speaking of courts, your home state of Wisconsin has a race for a seat on the Supreme Court there. If you're not from Wisconsin watching this show right now, why should you care?
If you want a Republican majority in the House, you should care because we know, because the current radical leftists, they took over the court 2 years ago. They redistricted our state houses, and so our majorities in both the Assembly and the state Senate shrunk. They didn't have time to address the federal congressional districts. They will do this as soon as they get that power, and so we'll probably lose at least 2 seats when they gerrymander. Plus, they'll probably overturn voter ID. They'll turn over any election integrity laws and procedures we have on the books. Probably make Wisconsin uncompetitive for a Republican for the 10 electoral votes for president. So this absolutely has national implications, enormous implications for Wisconsin. They'll overturn Act 10. That'll cost the Wisconsin taxpayers billions over the years. We'll turn Wisconsin into Minnesota, where they've got a governor that they refer to as Tampon Tim. I don't want to see Wisconsin go the way of Minnesota.
Okay. Yeah, don't Minnesota my Wisconsin. How's that?
There you go.
All right, Senator, always appreciate your time and your leadership on these issues. It's so needed, and hopefully people listen to what you're saying and start to weigh in, because you're right. We have an opportunity to do a lot right now with spending. We need to seize the moment. I appreciate your leadership and your time for being with us.
Stay well. Take care.
You bet, sir. Guys, thanks for joining us. What a great conversation as we make it over the hump towards the weekend. Tomorrow, an amazing panel you're coming away. And then Friday, Seb Gorka is here. My newsletter is free. As always, go to SeanSpicer.com to sign up. A VIP membership, always welcome. You can give one to a friend as well. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow on The Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.